Today, we're going to talk about Trump, Zelensky, and Vance. That's the big news these days, and had a little dust up at the White House over this. Greg, why don't you tell us about the videos we're going to watch?
Well, there's not much to talk about other than to say this was supposed to be kind of a predecessor to a press conference where they're going to talk about what the outcomes were, and it kind of decayed from there. And those are the players. There's a ton of reporters in the room, and let's start from there.
This thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred. And I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
Hey, I want to respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Chase, what do you got?
So we start off, Zelensky's got his eyebrows raised. And we frequently do this little eyebrow raise to get approval from other person. And we also do it when we want to appear innocent or avoid being harmed. So you're going to see that in those situations. And Trump is pretty much on baseline. Like, this is normal, everyday Trump so far, as he normally does. But he's ignoring President Zelensky. He usually addresses people in the room. One thing I always look for when I'm looking at any video is attention. I've taught my kids their entire life, pay attention to attention. So Trump uses his attention and where his body is facing and where he doesn't pay attention as a weapon of influence. You'll see him do this at press conferences, but you'll also see a lot of people do this. But the way he does this is extreme compared to most people. He's deliberately paying attention to the things that he wants you to think are important in the room. He's ignoring Zelensky, President Zelensky, completely. Vice President Vance comes in and he's making a point about words not solving problems, but actions. And I think there's also a hidden message in there for Trump about being diplomatic and maybe trying to ease the tension in the room by calling on an issue that isn't in the room so that the tension can decrease a little bit. So he's like, hey, there's this other guy out here who's kind of responsible for this stuff, maybe calming down the pressure. You'll also notice Vance isn't turning toward Trump or Zelensky during this remark. He's also using attention to drive your attention. So he's taking your attention by focusing his attention away from both of them temporarily. So it may be something that he's picked up from being around Trump. But this is going downhill quick. We'll see it in the next one. Scott, what do you got?
All right, I've covered this on every news outlet, it seems like, over the past week. So I tried changing it up every time. So this is going to be kind of basic. So I keep it that way. For Zelensky, I think this is this video is great for seeing what his baseline is before things take a turn, because he's relaxed. His body language is open. He's goofing around with his ear. He's, doing stuff with his mouth. He's not stressed. We're not seeing any cues whatsoever of stress. And I think he's under the impression that this is going to go the way it always has when he's been to the White House. He's not going to have any pushback on anything. He's going to say, oh, this is happening. He'll say, oh, that's too bad. And I want this. He's going to say, okay, you can have that. Because that usually, I'm under the impression that happens pretty much wherever he goes. So I could be wrong. Do you guys know differently than that?
Nope.
Okay.
Things going his way? No.
Yeah, okay, great. Because I looked, I couldn't find anything that said anybody went against him. So, and he's also leaned in toward President Trump. So let's keep an eye on that, because you lean towards somebody when you're trying to connect with them, you're trying to talk, and or somebody you may like. So it's not just a quick photo of it where he's leaning in, where you may have been scratching his back or something. He's leaning in. He's actually leaning in toward him. So that's actually a good sign of him trying to connect with him. And President Trump is doing his classic body language cues that we all know, and some of us make fun of him, but those are the things he does all the time. So all the people who do impressions of him, we're seeing the classics here.
At the Behavior Panel, our goal is to help you see behind the surface, to spot deception and analyze the true intent behind people's words. It is a mission that I personally feel strongly about, especially in today's bias and overwhelming media landscape. And mainstream media tends to blur the truth and make it really hard to see through the chaos. This is why all of us are proud to have Ground News as a sponsor. They help readers look beyond the mainstream narratives and uncover the patterns in the way that today's news really spins and frames the issues that are going on, or even just fails to cover them in the first place. Like they don't even talk about it. So for every story that you read on their app or their website, you get instant access to every outlet that's reporting on that thing. On top of that, there's a breakdown of each source's political bias. For instance, you get this report of how subjective their reporting tends to be, and if they're independently owned, or are they funded by corporations or governments, or are they getting their money from somewhere that's influencing what they're saying to you. So Ground News really helps you see the subtle ways that the media can very heavily shape our public opinion. I'm not even immune to it after studying all this psychology stuff, and it's good to be able to see behind the curtain. I'm actually in the process of writing a book. It's almost done, on media brainwashing. And I think they're one of the most practical solutions that I have ever seen. So check it out by scanning this QR code or go to ground.news/TBP. Our viewers get 40% off unlimited access, whether you subscribe for yourself or if it's a gift for somebody. Ground News is independent and subscriber funded, not by any special interest. So by subscribing, you're not only just getting a great product, you're directly supporting our work here at the Behavior Panel.
Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. So look, in context, this is 40 minutes in to 40 minutes of actually pretty good behavior from both of them. Fairly good 40-minute diplomacy until, a little after this point coming up. So what's been happening in the 40 minutes beforehand? Actually, you've had a fairly subdued Trump getting across his idea that the deal on the table is a good deal, and it is the peace process. Zelensky getting across his idea that he needs air support, he needs some further pressure. So they're already for 40 minutes really not aligned particularly, but they're tolerating each other actually pretty well for the first 40 minutes. At minute 35, we get a little bit of Rubio and a little bit of Vance, our first time of somebody else talking. But all in all, it's been pretty good for 40 minutes. At this point, Trump is actually getting a little more excited. He's spent most of the time like this, to be honest. And now, just like you say, Scott, he's now into squeeze box. He's now into monkey symbols, so we know that he's getting a bit more excited, and he's probably going to go a little more off script, a little more off, ad hoc for him. On hatred, we get raised eyebrows from Zelensky, this scratch at the back of the neck, this shifting from side to side on that. So hits a raw point on hatred. He chews the side of his mouth as well on that. I think that might be him trying to control an element of contempt and just play it as something else at that point. Trump says, I'm aligned with Europe. Zelensky tilts his head to one side, raises his eyebrows in a kind of, well, maybe you are. I think from Zelensky's point of view, a alignment with Europe would be complete unalignment with Putin and Russia. And so I think that tilt of one head and the raise of the eyebrows to like maybe is that he can't see that any alignment or any non-alignment with Russia could be an alignment with Europe. You're either on one side or the other side. And Trump, to an extent, explains that. Now, at this point in this video, Vance is allowed a second time to speak. He leans forward. He becomes a little more pointy, lecturing, a little bit of a teacher. He does obstruction regulators on Zelensky, and he brings up the idea of the theme of diplomacy in a teaching, regulatory, obstructing, lecturing way. I think, for my money, this is the point where it all goes downhill, and this is the moment that it changes. Until this point, everybody's been tolerating each other pretty well, and it was a decent enough piece of diplomacy. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to tie some of the things you all said together, and some I may disagree a little bit with you, Scott. I don't think this is baseline. I think he's already agitated. He's already agitated because of whatever just happened. We also know that at least he had met with some members of Congress. We have no idea what the day it unfolded and how much entitlement he felt he had. And I agree with you. I think he comes across as feeling like he's entitled to ask for this because he has asked and gotten it in the past. We also know that Biden at one point read him the riot act for feeling entitled about how much more he should get. So there's probably some of that in his personality. And probably any of us who are fighting a war and going to ask for help would feel some entitlement as well. So I'm not going to beat that up. Going to just start. But the interesting piece is, the reason I say he's agitated is he starts off looking for change in the floor. He's got that internal focus and then that down right, internal voice, down right, internal voice, down right. And suddenly his eyes go out of focus. That means something's going on inside his head that's not for our consumption. Maybe it's a frustration with something somebody had said. He's trying to deal with it. Remember, he's also in his third language, I believe. I think he's Russian, Ukrainian, and English. That's tough. That's really tough. Having been a pretty good Arabic linguist, I wouldn't want to be in this position in Arabic, even at my best. He does a bunch of things that are interesting as he's doing that down right, down left. He does it mouth grooming or adapter. And Mark, you're right. I think it could be containment. It's something, disapproval, something in there for sure. He's moving his seat position, which is odd considering in these kinds of situations, people mostly sit pretty still. I mean, Mark, you're in that room more often than we are, but that we talk about all the time. Chase, you brought it up more than one time. The person who moves less is perceived to be more powerful, and that really plays out in these kinds of rooms. His breathing is audible at one point, and he hard swallows and goes back to that adapter in his mouth. I see agitation, and maybe it's because of something he'd been promised before now. The other part is Trump, to your point, Chase, he's talking about him, not to him. And that is always a slap in the face, especially if you have a title. I mean, I use Trump, Zelensky. I don't use titles most of the time. I may occasionally. No disrespect intended. I'm just using names because it's easier. But that raises anxiety in people. And when he says aligned, I agree with you. But I also think he's like, well, maybe. Because you see his chin boss do that at the same time he's doing that head movement. Maybe that's maybe. I agree with you. I think him doing this in English is a poor choice. I love the handoff and regulators from Trump to J.D. Vance, though. He just goes, boop, almost literally, hey, it's your turn. And then Vance comes in. And whether you agree with Vance's spoken words or not, whether you agree with his message, you can't miss he's delivering exactly what he's trying to with illustrators, meaning our brain is punctuating its thoughts, regulators controlling the conversation. If Zelensky had a handler or an interpreter, they would probably notice all of this and call him back off the ledge. But it doesn't happen, and this is the beginning of bad things. And I think he comes across immediately as looking a little entitled, and he's already ramping up. I think we'll see it get a lot worse.
Hey, 1 second. The reason mine was so short is because I didn't do all mine. All I did was Zelensky. So let me just do really quickly, just hit these I'll hit bullet points on these. We'll go to President Trump. His illustrators are good. And his breath rate's normal. Everything, it seems fairly normal for him at this point, even though he's doing a lot of the cues and things. But again, we're used to all those. His cadence, voice tone, and volume are all pretty good and solid at this point. And for Vice President Vance, his movements are smooth and fairly relaxed as well. So his illustrators are on point, as like you were talking about, Greg, and his voice tone and volume are all seem normal. Everything seems right now, everything seems okay. The water's getting a little bit choppy, like Mark's talking about, because he steps in it. But it seems okay right now. And Vance, as always, his diction is clean, man. Clean as a whistle. You understand every word he says. So overall, I think the situation is normal for what's happening. Everybody's a little bit nervous, of course, because they're in front of the world while they're talking about these things. There's cameras, haters, people who love them, people who can't stand them. Everybody's in the same room, biased, non-biased, and it's getting ready to be politically charged. It is a little bit already, but it's getting ready to get ramp up a little bit there. All right, that's all I got. All right, I'm gonna have to think about that one.
This thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred. And I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
Hey, I want to respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing. President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now the President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2015.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was,
he killed.
I was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly
but-
right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, yeah, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him. Me, like a new president, in 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel. We signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are not
President,
strong-
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for
Have you
trying to
ever
bring
been-
an end to this
Have you
conflict.
ever been to
All right, Greg, what do you got?
It's a really good one because we see Zelensky who's trying to persuade J.D. Vance of something, and then he disagrees clearly. What he's trying to say is, look, you can't reason with this guy. The problem with this is if you today are going in for a job interview and you sit at the front desk and start trying to persuade the person at the front desk that you're the right employee, that's a waste of your time. This is a waste of his time. You should not be doing this in front of people. This, in this situation he's in, his best idea would be to say, hey, can we talk about the mechanics of this later? We'll talk about how we're going to get this done. I'll explain my point of view. Something like that works much better. If you've never been in the military, you've never had this experience of having your rear end lightened by a commander that you have no control over the conversation. You stand with your hands behind your back. Or senior NCO. One of the worst I ever had in my life was by a senior a command sergeant major, which is the highest rank you can make as an enlisted guy, who yelled at me for 45 minutes. And I stood with my hands behind my back and said, yes, Sergeant Major. Yes, Sergeant Major. Yes, Sergeant Major. Yes, Sergeant Major. That's your option. The best chance you have with that guy is to say, hey, sir, do you mind if we take this into a private setting? I'd feel much more comfortable. Sometimes they'll do it. Sometimes it will just extend the ass chewing. But the idea and the understanding and the maturity to be able to do that is a very important part of being an adult. I don't think we see that here. And I think either side of this could have called it down before it goes much further than right here. Right here is the red flag. It's time to back down. Zelensky wants to counter the idea of diplomacy, and it's just a bad idea in front of public, because now it looks like he's doing what J.D. Vance thought he came to do. He's passionate. He's trying to make his points. And he leans in. He's got illustrators that hit the point. It still comes across as entitled, at least to J.D. Vance and to Trump. And I think more to Vance than to Trump. I think Vance jumps on it and goes after him. And he's using his hands in regulators to stop him like this. But Zelensky doesn't see it. And he understands the message that he's sending, but he doesn't agree with it, and he has to make his point. So he backs up, crosses his arms, and this is one of those absolutes we always hear. This means you're closing somebody out. In this case, this absolutely means he's closing him out. His chin's up. His eyes are narrow. He's looking down his nose. He's got a very male adapter, and that's closing your legs in and out. That butterfly movement of his legs is something young men do a lot. And like, there's so much in here. I'm not going to go to the next one, but it just gets worse. He gets tighter. His brows get tighter. His eyes close. There's a ton of stuff in here. He hears everything Vance is saying at this point. His brain is still working. He's not in fight or flight to the point he can't understand him, but he wholeheartedly disagrees with everything Vance is saying. And we're headed for a train wreck, full speed in both directions. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, look, he hasn't come here to be lectured by the second in command. I think in his mind, whether the lecture is accurate or inaccurate, he's not here to be lectured by the pool boy here. Okay, and that's what I think in his mind has happened. That's why he scooches forward on this one. He says, "Can I ask you?" Vance says, "Yeah." And we get this look on his face of a little bit of grief in his forehead and a show of the top teeth. I think that suggests him going, okay, you've asked for it. This is going to be nasty. Okay, this is going to be painful. Now, whether it's painful or not, or whether that blows back on him, I think that's his attitude at that time. Now, what Zelensky does is put forward a story of a Putin that cannot be stopped and cannot be trusted to ever stop. That's accurate or inaccurate or something in between. I'll let you, decide whether you think that's true or not. But that's his story at this point. And he puts forward that story in direct confrontation with J.D. Vance, strong eye contact, forward into him. Now, equally so, J.D. Vance was giving him, strong regulators back. So, in my mind, he's kicked this off. Yeah. Zelensky has said, can I give you a bit more? Vance has said, I'm open to that. And so off it all kicks off here. At the end of it all, just as you say there, Greg, he leans back, he folds his arms, he tucks them right in with fingers, he closes right off, and he shows a face of contempt as well, as if to say, I'm done now. Yeah, that showed you. And he closes it down. J.D. Vance then tries to shut down the whole argument that's ensued based on Zelensky as being disrespectful, and also he has a point of weakness. Now, if you're trying to shut down an argument, going like you've been disrespectful and you have no power is usually not the way to do it. Now, we can argue about who kicked it off and who's escalated here and who's escalated there. But just like you said, Greg, there is a point at every point somebody speaks that anybody could close this one down. They are all, or they should be, diplomatic enough to be able to close this down in a smooth way for everybody. And nobody's doing this right now. Yeah. Whether it's conscious or unconscious, they're letting it ramp up and they're letting it escalate so that we will get what we're going to get at the end of this. But lovely sequence happening there. Chase, what do you got in this one?
Yeah, so if I see two people talking, and I agree with you, oh, by the way, but the way that I teach I've only trained a couple of politicians, no presidents or anything, Mark, but this is one of the first things I teach everybody. Slowness, need, and reactance. Those three things. Who's moving the slowest? who is reacting to the other person the least, and who needs the least amount of things from the other person. That dictates who's in charge of the situation. Am I moving slower? Who's reacting more? That person is not in charge, and whoever needs the other person the least will typically assume charge of that conversation. And depending on which side of the aisle you're on and how preconditioned you are, you will see this clip in two different ways. People on the far sides of either side will see a totally different version of reality here in the exact same video. So President Zelensky is trying to rebuild some rapport here, and his message is very clear. He's trying to help people to understand something, and it's important to him. He uses the word deal and even motions to Trump as he says the word deal. We're trying to make a deal here, and he does this toward Trump, President Trump. And all the while, keep in mind as you're watching this, the background of Trump is here in this room. The background of President Zelensky is here in this room. He's been through war and conflict and seen dead kids and dead bodies, and that you cannot delete that from your mind. That is permanently burned into your head. So one person is at the very bottom of Maslow's pyramid in his own mind, and the other person is a lot higher on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So President Zelensky finishes with a question about diplomacy to Vice President Vance by using his first name, saying JD, and he kicks back in his chair, does this postural retreat, crosses his arms, Greg, like you said, this chin thrust, which is kind of a challenge or defiance. And he starts speaking with his eyes closed a little bit, which we know is a demonstration of maybe smugness. And yes, it's true in Ukraine as well. I looked this up. This is absolutely closed off, challenging, dismissive, and maybe righteous behavior. And he feels this way. He's at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Trump is sitting there silently, trying not to pay much attention to Zelensky, trying to let the dialogue between JD and Zelensky finish. And Vance puts his hands up in more defensive posture as he starts to speak. He calls Zelensky Mr. President. He even calls Zelensky Mr. President and goes into telling him it's disrespectful to try to litigate this in front of the American media, I think is what they used. And he's leaning forward. His hands are open. He's trying to keep his cool. Zelensky's still maintaining that closed off posture and what looks like an unwillingness to hear what Vice President Vance is saying. Scott, what do you got?
All right, but I think this is where he steps in it. I think this is where it really starts heading down the commode, because he begins with an all-knowing attitude that he's used to having there at the White House to say, like I said before, hey, here's what I think. Like, oh, really? You think that? Here's what I want. Oh, well, here you go. And all that's changed. So he doesn't realize that until now. And that's when they're hipping him to the fact that things aren't like they used to be a couple of months ago. So, and then once he says his part, and then Vance jumps in, Vance starts to answer, and then Zelensky tries to interrupt him. And he throws his head back like you guys were talking about and starts talking. And he does that thing where he starts repeating the question over and over, trying to get in. And then again, this is where it gets even worse. Things get even worse because when Vance starts answering, his cadence changes. He speeds up a little bit, but his voice tone doesn't change, and his volume doesn't change much, but the cadence speeds up a little bit. So we know he's getting a little bit fired up, and that's when his illustrators start, and he's regulating as well, but his illustrators come out as he's doing, and then he starts not just pointing, but almost, I don't think he would push him, but he's leaning in that hard to get his point across to him, to get him to listen. So I think he's gone from defense mode to attack mode in this point. So I think Vance is kind of the elephant in the room, which is everything has changed now. Vance is like, I'm going to let's bring that elephant on in here. So I think that's what he's done, is bring the elephant out. So everybody can see it, go, yeah, it is an elephant. Yeah, I didn't see that standing over there. So I think that's why there's such a dramatic change in Zelensky's body language as well, because he starts closing up at this point. And even though he wants to, he's a soldier and all that, he's the president and he's in charge, he's against two monsters of being alphas in a situation like that. So it's really tough on him. It's hard to fight the two on one thing coming out of the gate, and he's nobody's swinging yet. Not literally, but nobody's swinging yet. But it's coming. It's on the way. All right, we're good. All right. Okay, Chase, I'll give you that one.
Good, good.
You meant that.
President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now the President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2015.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was,
he killed.
I was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly
but-
right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, yeah, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire, all of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are
President,
not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's exactly
Remember
what
this.
you're doing.
I'm not
You're in
dictating.
no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
Feel influence.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the
bad position,
beginning
and
of
he
the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not in a
Mr.
good
Graham,
position.
I
You don't
was
have the
saying-
cards right now. With us, you start having
not
cards.
playing
But
cards.
right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
Yeah, you're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What you're-
III.
what you're
You're
speaking
gambling
about?
with
What you're
World
speaking
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country,
I'm
that's
with all
back to you,
respect to your
far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. So he says, Zelensky says, have you ever been to Ukraine that you see what problems we have? Vance comes back. I've been to. Zelensky comes in. Come once. Vance comes back. I've actually watched the stories. This is an extraordinary hit. An extraordinary hit. Just as you said, Scott, Vance, usually, great fluency, great diction, absolutely knocked off here, because what Zelensky has called him out on is you've never been to a front line. Now, but Vance could go, you're absolutely right, I've never been to a front line, but here's what I know. Here's where I have been. What he says is I've been to, can't complete the sentence. Come once, says that twice. The actually part means he's already trying to confront another idea about him. So he's already got in his you're calling out that I've never seen dead bodies. I've never seen action. I've never seen the horrors of war. And that could be accurate. That could be completely true. Loss of fluency there. Okay. Increased pointing now from Vance. So in my mind, anything that says, hey, you know, this guy is relaxed and he's in control. No, it's completely knocked off by this one. Completely escalated by this. Then calls Zelensky a propagandist. Okay, that's either true or false or something in between. I'll let you decide that. But that's not how you de-escalate anything. Equally, it's not how you de-escalate anything to go, I think you're a coward and you'd never come to a front line, to allow the other person to go, yeah, but I watch TV, like I've seen the stories, like, isn't that good enough? Yeah. So both of them are spiraling horribly at this point. Zelensky then starts to browbeat. On the head goes up and down. There's browbeating of Vance. Trump now, a little bit later on, he finds a good reason to try and shut this down, which is the emotional instruction. He goes, don't tell us how to feel. Don't tell us how to feel. Zelensky then tries to reinterpret that to go, well, it will affect you. It will affect you. And at this point, it now supremely escalates into what I would say is the Real Housewives of the White House. It's a show. It's a show. It's just people bickering and talking. Nobody's in control at this point. Nobody's taking control. Actually, everybody's enjoying the fact that they're in an argument. They've got no conscious control over this, although Trump later on will say that he did. I don't think that's quite accurate. I think it's escalated into, as he says, great TV at this point, but not great diplomacy. Here's what would have been great diplomacy. You always use a translator, regardless of how good you are at the language. You always use a translator because it slows stuff down. And the translator is a diplomat. And the translator is able to go, yeah, I'm not using that word. I know what they meant, but I'm going to change the word on that. And if you get the word wrong, the translator can retranslate. So they could say he doesn't mean feeling, he means affect. It will affect the US. He's not telling you, he's telling you it will affect you. That's fair. Of course, it's already affecting the US. You've got Zelensky in your office. That's already an effect. Okay, so how you're feeling about that, yeah, Trump's right. You don't need to tell people how to feel. Trump's being very soft-skilled at this point about don't tell us how to think and feel. But complete spiral at this point. Chase, what do you got on this one?
Yeah. So let's go from the other side. Zelensky starts off with what's called a reductionist argument. So he's accused of forcing people into the military, these conscripts, unwillingly, and having manpower issues with his warfighters. And by the way, J.D. Vance was a U.S. Marine Corps officer and I think he did a few deployments. But his argument is that everyone has problems. So, like, if you called me an alcoholic and I said, everyone has problems, you can agree with that. But this is designed to create agreement. There's no real acknowledgement of the issue. He's also using the direct experience argument, and which is that if you were not there personally, in person, and you only saw videos, there is no possibility that you could know what's going on. There's maybe some truth to that, which is why it's effective, but it's still not addressing the issue at all. Then there's a suggestion to the people of the United States that there will also be problems if we continue down this path, and that is called a social aversion appeal. To let a group of people know that there's going to be issues that have to do with some level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs unless he gets this support. So Trump is now offended by this, and this is just two guys with egos. And I'm going to tell you what type of egos they are and what narcissistic traits both of them are exhibiting. So we know Trump is quick to snap back at anybody trying to speak to the American people who isn't aligned with him. So Trump starts off with two stop gestures. These gestures right here, like this, to get somebody else. It's a regulator, as Scott and Greg call it, to get somebody to stop talking. And a direct order of don't tell us what to feel. And this argument keeps going, and Trump goes into dominance mode. Several gestures that move into Zelensky's personal space all of these gestures that move into his space, lots of open-handed gestures. And Zelensky has an unusual response of saying, you will feel influence. You will feel influence. Maybe it's a word choice, but he's saying this several times while he's pointing to himself. And I don't understand this one. Maybe y'all can help me understand what he meant in the comments. But Trump says you don't have the cards right now. And Zelensky's response is to dismantle this argument by pretending not to understand the metaphor, which is a really bad way to do this. When somebody uses a metaphor in any discussion, you can leverage the hell out of that. Correcting someone is not the mature move. This is the kind of stuff you see in high school, middle school. We're not playing cards here. And Zelensky, and I'm not fending for either side so far. I may at the end. Zelensky doesn't spend much time on camera with his eyebrows raised like this in this innocence display, but he does here. It's out of baseline. So we tend to do this to communicate harmlessness. That's if we see this constantly during a conversation, it's usually harmlessness or innocence. And a lot of mammals do this to avoid being hurt. Even dogs have adopted this just within the last couple 100,000 years, this eyebrow movements that they didn't have before. And Trump was loud, aggressive, direct, and he responded as Trump does in a pretty baseline way to how he responds to confrontation. I don't think this was too far outside of his baseline. Zelensky was very passionate and direct, but he tried to lecture a U.S. president in the Oval Office, which is a bad choice for any human being, no matter what, no matter what. Trying to get into private as fast as you can is probably the answer, but I'm not a politician. I'm not a diplomat. Maybe I'm wrong. But keep in mind, they had a very civil conversation for like 40 minutes leading up to this. And a question from, I think it was a Polish media representative, started this kind of cascade that we're seeing right here. Scott, what do you got?
All right. Zelensky's gone from being all relaxed and stuff. He's really stressed right now, really tensed up. His back is straightened up. He's got his head up because he's on point here. He's got to be careful because he's under attack. Now, his facial expressions, I thought it was interesting because he's only using 3 or 4 of them, but they go from one to the other fairly quickly. I think as he's trying to decipher what's being said, like Greg was saying earlier, we're talking about a guy who's talking with using a language that's not his main language. So it's kind of tough as he deciphers it and tries to decide how to say it, whatever he's going to say. But after a while, it comes natural to you. So a lot of the argument can be laid on that, but not as heavily as a lot of people are saying. That's the impression I have about that. So he's gone from telling them the way things are, here's what's happening, to listening or trying to listen because he's being told the way things are as things have changed. So his cadence, voice tone, and volume, all these things went up, and then they started coming down a little bit once he realizes there's no winning this. So, and another point when he's talking to Vance, he uses what's called, or what Greg has coined as his teaching face. Greg, will you explain teaching face?
Sure. It's just as somebody throws something out to you, then they pause to make sure you're getting it. You'll see different people have different faces they make, but you watch as they spoon feed you information and just go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody has a little bit different. Yeah.
And I always tell this story when this comes up because one time I was watching a video of a guy that I was supposed to break down, and I emailed it to Greg. I said, "What is this? I've never seen this before. I had, but not in this way." He said, "Yeah, it's his teaching face." I was like, "Here, what's a teaching face, man? Let me have it." And that's what he explained to me, which made complete sense. But the guy said this weird. You remember that guy, Greg? Do you remember what he looked like?
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll hold their brow up and kind of pert their mouth and trying to make eye contact with you, like, "Yeah, you got it, you got it."
Yeah, yeah. It was just odd. Well, the way he was doing it's kind of odd anyway.
Yeah, his was weird.
So
He was just kind of a smart ass look. Yeah.
yeah. So the points he's making, these are all rehearsed things he's trying to get out because he's got his list of things he tries to cover when he goes into meetings or when he does the press or whatever. And he's got these lined up and he's trying to deliver one and he can't quite get it out. That's why he keeps starting over and over at the same time or with the same words each time so they can flow out and he knows the point that's going to make. But he doesn't get a chance to do that. So, and then when Zelensky tells Vance, you will feel the change, that's when President Trump pops and says, "No, you're not talking to him that way. You're not going to tell us how we feel." This is where he gets fired up there. So, like you were saying, Chase, you can't come into the White House and be telling the president the way things are, especially when you're not.
In any country.
Yeah,
Any country.
yeah,
Right. That's right.
exactly. That's not your turf. That's not your place. You're supposed to respect that person in their office, especially in their country. So, but he doesn't like that. He gets all wound up because he's under the impression that Zelensky is, um, he's not being very nice to our country. He's disrespecting us, and he's not having any of that. So and then we see several different expressions cross his face. They don't stay very long, but it's the same two or three, and they're really odd for this situation. So, granted, he's speaking in a different language, like we were talking about a minute ago, but still, there comes a point where it starts to flow, and you're good with it. It's tough, I'm sure, but it's not tough, but and it just takes a little bit longer to decode and then deliver what you're going to say. But I don't think that's the major problem here, as some people think it is. I don't think it is. So I think he understands what's happening. I really do. Greg, what do you got?
Not sure I agree with you on that. I think he's too far gone at this point. I think what's happening here is a combination of, okay, he's in his third language. Let's leave that and say, okay, that would mean nuanced language. Chase, you brought up a really good point that you should disarm an argument like cards with a different approach. I think the nuance of language and the ability to disengage when your brain is already down the pipe is tough. I don't think it's language. I think it's a combination of fight or flight language and out over skis in terms of who he's expecting. Let's give you a couple of data points. What entertainers hate, Mark, you can mention this, more than anything else is being upstaged. There's two of them upstaging the hell out of each other right here side by side. One of them happens to be the 800-pound gorilla, who you don't typically upstage. And so I think we're seeing both of them play a little bit of that. That's a little bit of a stimulus and an irritation. So the reason I'm looking for it is because let's start with JD. With Vance, he makes a mistake right out of the gate. I thought we were going to get a Kamala answer right there because he goes, but to your point, Mark, and he doesn't come up with an answer. His cadence changes, uncharacteristic of him entirely. So he's down the path too. He's already hitting some fight or flight. Now, a little more polished. He's a little more polished kind of a guy. So he regroups, but you can pay attention and watch. He made a mistake and he knows it and he's trying to regroup and he's doing that thing we always talk about. A duck looks really smooth on the top and their feet are paddling like hell underneath. He's paddling like hell to try to get his feet under him. I think, by the way, Chase, he was a combat photographer, if I remember right. So he's seen a lot of stuff, to your point. And so he's going to come back at him and say, look, you haven't seen what I've seen either, and there's a little bit of anger. But Zelensky demonstratively gets angry, narrows his mouth, furrows his brow, tightening around his eyes. That brow beating you're talking about, Mark, as he's pushing his head down. His arms are gripping. He's rigid in his body, and he gets on the edge of his chair and sits up taller. All that is demonstrative anger. And that stuff starts to take your thinking brain out of play. That affects your ability to understand concepts in language. Mark, to your point, when I had the choice to have an interpreter or not, we call them interpreters, not translators. But when I had a chance for a terp, always use them, even if I could understand everything going on, because it gave me a pause, a second to think about my next influence. How much more important is that when you're on the world stage trying to get support? And if you watch, the best body language in the entire thing is the ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. with their head in their hands. Like, oh my God, what's going on? So somebody should have been there. And then as Vance starts to attack the points to support his story, Zelensky mutters something under his breath, which is really a good way to get in a fight. And that's how this thing gets really cascaded. The media says, and you have to bleep this word, Scott, but the media says that he called him a bitch under his voice. Now, whether that's true or not, don't know, don't speak Russian well enough to pick it up, but it's there running a thing. So Zelensky then tries to do one thing I think is disarming. He tries to play on empathy. If you've never been there, anybody in a war is having trouble. You would have trouble too, except for you got an ocean. That's empathy. That is an empathy move, but it doesn't play that way because of everything going on, and it's just cascaded. I'm not going to go much further on that. There's still a handful of things, but would be really difficult to recover at this point, even for somebody who's talented in front of this situation, to say, Mr. President, I apologize. Could we please take this somewhere else? Even then, that would be tough now. And realize the guy has a language issue. I think he's angry. You got 2-on-1, and both of these guys are big talkers and big movers. I think we're at a point of no return, and I think it's going to show in Zelensky even more as we get further in.
Oh, Mark, that was so natural. That was
But
it.
what you didn't see is how I've been planning that for the whole 40 minutes we've been here. It's like I was working up to this moment. My work is
That
done
was
now.
nice.
I'm out.
That was nice. That was nice.
You just took Chase's trophy for next time.
Yeah, exactly.
Oof. That was slick, man.
Them's fighting words. Now Chase
I can now take down my vision board, Chase, of like big X on it. Done.
Into this
Have you
conflict.
ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's
I will
respectful
answer.
to come to the Oval Office
I
of
will
the United
answer.
States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're doing.
I'm not
You're
dictating.
in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
Feel influence.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the
bad
very
position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I was
You
about
don't
to say
have the
that.
cards right now. With us, you start having
Not
cards.
playing
But
cards.
right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country,
I'm
that's
with all
backed you
respect to your
far
answer.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once this
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States
what
of
are you
America
speaking about?
and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not
Yeah.
speaking loudly. Your country is
Can I-
in big
can I-
trouble.
can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this.
I...
You have a damn
We-
good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid
thank you.
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like that.
All right. Chase, what do you got?
If you're on one side of the aisle, you're going to see a bully and a tag team operation on one person who's being dominated and bullied on camera. If you're on the other side, you're seeing a president stand up to corruption in the military industrial complex, which is feeding corruption throughout Ukraine and probably DC. If you're open-minded, you might see two presidents acting outside the realm of what could be considered presidential. And you might see two people with giant egos trying to out-inflate the other person. And this entire interaction is like a Rorschach test, like an ink blot test. It typically says more about the viewer than it does about the video. Both of them should have been more composed. Trump regulates here by touching Zelensky on the shoulder. Mark's going to talk about that, and probably some evolution is going to come after that too. But despite all of these mistakes, Zelensky's actions were likely intended as defense rather than insult. So keep that in mind. They were not intended as insults. So that's a big difference there. But we're seeing behavioral patterns here. Trump is seen by a lot of people as a narcissist, which many world leaders are. Many world leaders are. And from a purely behavioral perspective, we're seeing Zelensky's not wearing a suit, and he conveyed crisis through this military attire, and some people saw that as a very disrespectful thing in a formal setting. He challenged Trump's quote narcissistic traits or tendencies or whatever, but he failed to grasp Trump's need for ego massage, and that led to a rage. And that's what happened here. He cast doubt on all of Trump's deals. He questioned Trump's ability to negotiate with Putin. He's challenging Trump's self-image as a deal maker, which is a bad decision. In any negotiation, it's a bad decision. But I think he struggled with a mental shift. What we're seeing here is he may have failed to adapt from a war-torn climate and war rhetoric to diplomatic needs and diplomatic speech. So that might make him look out of touch. And Trump's commonly called an overt narcissist. So big energy and gratitude, expects gratitude from everybody. And when Zelensky doesn't immediately stroke his ego with "thank you so much, sir," he flips and he calls it disrespect. Zelensky, on the other hand, is a lot more likely to be a covert narcissist. There's a lot more sensitivity to criticism, the subtle need for validation, this tendency to frame himself as like a victim to gain support. So we have two of these giant egos here. So psychology folks really point out that Trump's got this need to dominate, and it's kind of sparked the fire. And Zelensky's refusal to back down, maybe from prolonged exposure to war, which is effing horrible, more than personality, just kind of poured fuel on the fire. And the end result here is right there in your face. It's a tense ego clash that just derails this whole thing. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, the big thing missing here is rational thought on everybody's part to calm it down, to take the runaway train away. Listen to what people say. When people say things, they're trying to send you a message. And J.D. Vance says, you, in fact, I don't know if it was the exact words, campaign for Harris, for the other side. And you haven't thanked us in this meeting. That's very clear. Look, you're on the other side. What are you here for? You're here to argue with us in public. Now we're in a place where there's no winning. There's no winning here at all. Whoever is in the room, including that ambassador, should have said, Mr. President, can I get you for a minute? Hey, we have an emergency. Pull the fire alarm might be a good choice at this point. It's such a train wreck. So the underlying issue here is that he came in and he is appearing entitled. You can't say he doesn't appear entitled. He feels like he needs to say whatever he wants to say in front of the American public, regardless of what they're trying to say. And they didn't say, hey, that's for closed doors. So both sides could have turned this off. Neither did. But watch Vance. He's demonstrative when he's pointing out you campaign for the other side. Now Zelensky's cornered. There is no place to go. And I always say, even a deer will kick your ass if you corner him. That's just the way it is. People, when they're cornered and they feel like there's 2-on-1 and there's no turp there, lots of missed opportunities. This is a guy who I also think can't lose an argument to win a war. All he needs to do at this time is drink a little pond water, back down. He can't either. So we got the whole problem with all these people doing this very thing. I think he also came here with a plan on how he was going to negotiate in public and didn't read the room, didn't pay attention, didn't back down. That's another failure on his part. So there's failures on both sides of this thing. Trump, when you push Trump into a corner, he comes out swinging pretty hard, and it doesn't need to be the corner you think it is. It's the corner he's defined. So being ready for that is important. The other one, look, if you're arguing with your spouse tonight, just break eye contact when they're talking to you and see how that goes. That will escalate the argument, and Zelensky does that again. If you want to know what Trump thinks, I said, listen to what people say. The single line in this entire thing that tells you how to get it back on track is he says it's going to be hard to do business like this. All you had to do is say, I'm all about business. What will it take for us to get back in line? What do you think I need to do to make this work? And you'll be back there. Doesn't happen, and doesn't happen. Scott, what do you got?
All right, yeah. Zelensky, again, is using his teaching face, and he's talking down to Vance. But then again, like what Mark said earlier, he sees him as not even second in command. He just sees him as a peon. I think that's the way he's talking to him anyway. He doesn't have any respect for him at all. I don't feel like. So if you read Vance's book, he's been through a lot. I mean, he had a rough upbringing, all that. So when he gets in a fuss, that's really not that big a deal for him. He may even like it a little bit. Some people do. So he doesn't mind fussing, and he's good at fussing, I think. So I think that's another reason it's turned out a little bit better for him because he can see where Zelensky's coming from. Not that Trump can't and anybody else can't, but I think early on he can see what the problem is and start building his attack against it. One thing I've noticed about comedians or people who are really funny, what they'll first do when they meet you, they'll find the things that you think are wrong with you. So if anything comes up, they'll cut you with that. And sometimes they go for the throat, man. And it's hilarious, but it can get dark quick. And I think that Vance, having been through some of the stuff he's been through, I think he's able to do that. See what their things are they don't like about themselves, and then talk about those, bring those up. So I think that's why Zelensky feels like a little bit of a fish out of water here, because he's not used to, again, people not kissing his hind end and giving him whatever he wants and being totally nice to him. When the part about thanking President Trump, a lot of people are going to say, well, he did thank him. He did thank the United States. Well, he thanked Biden and Obama or whoever's running everything, but he never did say thanks to Trump. I understand where they're coming from, because that's another way of putting him in his place and saying, hey, man, we're doing all this stuff for you. We're trying to help you here. You didn't even say thanks. So that's another way to give it to him, I think. So, and then his attitude of sort of being above it, like Chase said, if you're on one side, you're going to see it one way. If you're on the other side, you're going to see it another way. But they see this attitude as being above it all, And I think it's dawning on him as he goes along. This isn't normal. I'm not who I used to be to these people. I'm not that guy. So I'm not going to be able to. Didn't have the power I used to have in this situation. And as President Trump's trying to keep Zelensky's attention as things heat up, a couple of times he's really in his space a lot, but one of the times he gets in there and he touches him once. And then when Zelensky starts to turn away, President Trump pushes him a little bit. And it's not just like a touch or a little tag or something. I think it's a push, because he's like, listen to me, man, I'm talking to you. It's one of those. He's not like pushing hard. So when you get it, so when you're people watching this, don't take what I'm saying out of context. It wasn't a shove. It's a push. Big difference than a shove and a push. So that's why he pushes him on the arm, try to get his attention, get him turned back around there so he'll pay attention to him. And Mark's better at that kind of stuff than I am when it comes to the heated argument and people getting in the other one's space. But so, Mark, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah,
you don't have to talk about that. But.
Listen, no, the reality is he gets into personal space. So he's no longer, in fact, into intimate space. So personal space is I'm within striking distance of you. Intimate is I actually I could touch you, and I do. And so this is an intimate move. Now, by intimate move, I don't mean it's soft and it's cozy and they love each other. It's quite the opposite. I think you're right, Scott. I think he is trying to bring attention back to him, twist him round towards him. To your point, Greg, it's two performers, great entertainers in their own worlds, vying for who's going to take charge of this scene. And for Trump, he has no problem or has no moderation to realize that it's probably not a good idea to touch the other world leader in that way. You can touch other world leaders, but that's going to be seen as somewhat of a strike. I know you're right, Scott, that it isn't actually a shove. It's not actually that, but optically you can frame it as that. And to your point, Chase, it's the Rorschach test. So if you want to frame it as that was an act of war, you can. If you want to frame it as no, he was just trying to bring him into line,
yeah,
you can do that. Like, you can do whatever you like, and you'll see it how you're going to see it. But ultimately, I've never seen that before. That was extraordinary. That's extraordinary. Now, does it happen behind closed doors? Oh, for sure. For sure it does.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Not usually with other world leaders, I have to say. Not usually, but it'll happen at other levels, at lower levels, for sure. You have to jump in there sometimes. Now, one great maneuver that could have been done here is somebody writes a message in whatever language on their mobile and hands it to the world leader of choice, which is like, wind this up, and there's an excuse on there. And it's like, listen, I've got to, and you get yourself out of here's the Rorschach test for me, Chase. What I'm seeing here is the Laurel and Hardy film Tit for Tat, where it's just escalating and escalating and escalating and escalating. You know, both of them get both the US side, for me, get a little bit parental. Again, Rorschach test, parental, a bit like you haven't even said that you said thank you. It's like, it's a bit like when you go to, you've lent somebody money and then you see them, you know, for their kids, and then you see them at the restaurant having a smack up meal. It's like, yeah, at that point, man, it's not like, don't lend the money if you're worried about how it's going to get spent. Don't lend it. Okay. If they're having a slap up meal with it, they're having a slap up meal with it. It's like, you know, and maybe there's a different story, and you're going to see what you hoped you were going to see in the end, and you maybe won't investigate, you know, what that's about, you know. So look, I think Trump goes in somewhat to protect Vance and shut this argument down. Zelensky reignites it again, draws Trump into more argument. We get this idea of 3 weeks, says Trump, 3 days, says Zelensky, and just tosses it away, basically going, Putin said he could finish this war in 2 days, and here we still are. And it was a number of weeks before the firepower showed up from America. So Zelensky is right to an extent. It's like, I saw this guy off for way longer than he possibly ever imagined or broadcast to his people. So he does have some reason to go, you know what? We're strong. We can do this. Trump tries to recapture it, brings it back. Now, what he does do is tries to bring it back to the audience and recapture it and bring it back to the journalists, which is why the journalists are there, because you can answer journalist questions. Everybody can have a go. Okay. And you don't start to confront each other. That's why you do the journalist pool. Okay. It should have never have been allowed to be, hey, why don't I talk? For me, it starts with Vance, him directly shoving back and going and moderating the other world leader. And that didn't go well. That should have never happened. You focus everything back at the press, and that deflects the eye contact, and that deflects the conflict that's going to happen. But anyway, regardless of who's at fault, and I don't think anybody's at fault, everybody's at fault here. Regardless, it's spun way out of control now, way out of control.
Have you said thank you once this
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No,
Can
you've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said thank
stupid
you.
president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like that.
All right, we've seen some things we've never seen before. We've seen almost going toe-to-toe, and it's almost like a boxing match, and they're in the White House. Mark, what did you see?
Yeah, well, something that I sincerely think and sincerely hope we won't see again. I don't know really who kicked this off, who's to blame, or if really anybody's to blame, quite honestly, because everybody at some point could have de-escalated this. They have the skill, and if they don't, they should have the skill, or the people around them had the skill to be able to de-escalate. They didn't do that. It shouldn't have happened as it did. Let's not see any of that kind of thing again. Chase.
And in this video, Trump is navigating this return back to leadership, and Zelensky's bearing the weight of a horrible war. And it reveals this human side of all of this stuff. And there are complex emotions here like pride, insecurity, stubbornness, all woven together in a little French braid. But conflict naturally draws our attention. Research shows that we're more likely to watch videos with tension, and it's rooted in our basic instinct to focus on struggle. It's similar to how we can't look away from an accident, and like traffic accidents cause traffic because people just slow down to look. And it's possible this clash was intentionally heightened, maybe anticipating that a public confrontation would go viral and maybe amplify the moment beyond the normal coverage cycle. I'm just saying it's possible. Greg?
Frankie Goes to Hollywood is what comes to mind. When two tribes go to war in the 1980s with the mannequins fighting each other, it makes me think of that. It's so uncomposed and such a mess. Let me tell you that when you're doing elicitation, you're collecting intelligence, and you're in a bar, you're in a restaurant, we are willing to look really stupid to get out of this. We're willing to pour a glass of water out on the table, knock over something, do a faux pas, so it gets us out. There's nothing sacred about this argument. You need to get out of this argument when you get in. I'm going to take this away from world leaders for just a minute and say, if this happens at your Thanksgiving, knock your tea over, get up and leave. Find a way to get up. And Mark, to your point, a cell phone could have done it. Something else could have done it. A TERP could do it. Plan, contingency plan, and be ready for conflict when it occurs. And you won't end up in this situation, because if you let yourself get to the point that your thinking brain turns off and your reactive brain responds, you're going right where this went. Scott, what do you got?
I really like this one because we did get to see things we've never seen before. And like Mark was saying earlier, this is what happens behind the scenes. I'm sure of it. Because how can you have something that's so volatile being just discussed like just normally? You can't. When you're talking about people dying, you're talking about changes of the world happening in countries and things like that. So I think we just got a little peek into the back room by accident there. So because you're dealing with two really large egos, and that's what's going to happen. They're going to butt up against each other. They're going to butt heads. So I'm under the impression that's what happened. And even though we weren't supposed to see that, I'm sort of glad we did, so we can see that they're just people too. All right. Thanks for another good one, fellas. We'll see you next time.